There will be a surprise outbreak, and I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why history, the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID, will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
Complacency is one thing, but what no one predicted was a future president with an extreme narcissistic personality. More than anything else, it was the president's narcissistic personality that stopped him from engaging in the science that could have contained COVID-19. The word narcissism is now overly used in everyday language, which has diluted its meaning, but within a more formal framework, narcissism is a specific set of extreme personality traits that can be highly dysfunctional to a person and the people around them. If that person is the leader of a country, the effects can be devastating. It's important to distinguish between narcissism as a disorder and narcissism as a personality. They are different. This is not a diagnosis, nor an attempt to peg a mental illness. People with mental illness need support, not stigmatization. Narcissism is an explanation for his personality, which brings with it a broader issue. His narcissistic traits are traits that we accept and encourage in our leaders. The question becomes, do we as a society want to continue encouraging narcissistic traits in our leaders? The US president has a clearly defined narcissistic personality, enabled by the political faction around him. Originally, all the media could do was talk about the president's individual outrageous actions without connecting them to the personality. They analyzed his actions as if he were normal, but he is most definitely not normal. Ironically, it was probably this political incorrectness that got him elected in the first place. Gradually, the more in-depth media organizations have cottoned on to the patterns of his behavior. The great irony here is that even though there were extraordinary amounts of money and expertise available, they couldn't stand against such destructive leadership. I could list specific problems of the government, but like much of the media, I would be in danger of missing the forest for the trees. Presidents have always reshuffled their staff, made budget recommendations, refocused their values, and dealt with outbreaks without needing monstrously sized pandemic plans. Ultimately, it wasn't the individual problems themselves, but the psychology of the current US president that stopped him from engaging in the science and the resources of the US government. The outrageous behaviors of the US president are all part of his narcissistic personality. Looking at just the coronavirus outbreak, we can see many of his narcissistic traits expressed. The need to feel more powerful than those around him, his emotional instability, the difficulty he has making stable relationships, only talking about himself. Criticism makes him feel like he's losing social status, so he lashes out. Denying everything, even when he's caught out, and blaming everyone else for everything. His distorted sense of reality. Everyone walking on eggshells around him. Even the narcissistic phenomenon of having a zealously loyal following. Particularly damaging for a country, the tendency to split communities by exploiting differences. And the thing that exhausts everyone around them, the thing that makes people give in to the narcissist's demands, the narcissist never stops. There's never a break. It's perpetual and unrelenting, crashing the world around him from one crisis to another. The US president shows all these traits to extremes. And like a confused lover, the American people are caught in a relationship they don't understand, trying to cope, and before they can find the ground with their feet, reality is pulled out from underneath them again and again. This is what it feels like to be in a relationship with a person with narcissism. Narcissists are shocking when you first encounter them and you have no idea how to deal with them. It takes a long time to figure out first what's going on and then to create strategies for dealing with their personality. The thing about narcissists is they never change. You think they change, but they just learn how to speak words of redemption to get out of trouble and then go back to being themselves. They are never shamed into admitting fault. They will continue to be outrageous. Those who are against the president still have not learnt that, and still act surprised when he continues to be outrageous, as if by catching him out for the millionth time will somehow change something. Those who are for him don't realize that their needs are as expedient to him as everything else.
So what do you think President Trump should do to work on this area? So I think he probably needs to come into our communities and listen and find out exactly, talk to those families and find out what's really going on.
The president's supporter assumes he has the empathy to want to help. If the president did do something, it would only be because he saw their needs as stepping stones for more power. Ultimately, they too will suffer as he works against them in private to influence others who can offer him more. Is the chaos worth the political goal? So long as the president is in office, the same drama will repeat. He will always find another way to push the boundaries, and he will justify his actions, blurring the idea that he's done something wrong. Then he will push the boundaries again and again until events have spiraled into insanity, and there will never be a point where you can say normality led to insanity. This is the way narcissists work. The president's lack of empathy and need for self-image are so all-consuming that he will risk millions of lives in order to save his social standing. While people were dying and losing jobs and businesses, he talked at a coronavirus briefing about the cost he paid, the billions of dollars to become president. He refuses to wear face masks, saying it would send the wrong message. He wants to send the illusion that things are going back to normalcy to help his re-election. But paradoxically, he sends that message by not taking the necessary steps to actually make it happen. One of the more tragic examples of politics at play during a pandemic. Meanwhile, he continues to say many noteworthy things in briefings and on Twitter that make it seem like he is competent and knows what's going on. As a narcissist, he understands that these are the things he should be saying to influence others, but also like a narcissist, there's no connection to reality. He lacks the skills he boasts about having and doesn't do the things he says he will. His words are his reality, they are his weapons. He didn't know how to deal with the pandemic, but characteristic for a person with a narcissistic personality, he refused to admit his lack of knowledge. Science does not care what people think, it objectively uncovers the way the world works. For the US president, science was his enemy because it didn't agree with his opinions, and threatened to show up his lack of understanding. He created a culture of fear around it, and fired those who advocated it. He not only ignored the science, he suppressed it. He refused to work with those who knew what to do, and instead helped spread misinformation, even misusing some of the pandemic preparations that were available. Mirroring the melodramatic life of a narcissist, this is the literal tale of the truth of science being a threat to the deepest psyche of a man who wants to reject reality. He's got windmills on the brain. Some would argue that the situation in America is not the fault of the president. They would argue that the current situation represents a deeper division within American society. However, given the narcissistic effect can be seen at a local level within the lives of people with narcissism, any analysis of the current situation must incorporate the president as a major factor. Positions of leadership within the White House were left vacant. There were extreme examples of cronyism as he rewarded those who yielded to his version of reality, a reality that placed his narcissistic needs at the center. Positions were replaced with family members or associates who had no expertise in the area and no place being there. He refuses to hear anything that doesn't fit into his version of the world. He wants to hear only good news. Everyone has to walk on eggshells around him. White House officials can only talk to him about the strategies he likes, while more important strategies are shunned. The desire to suppress the science flows down from the president to the officials who vie for his approval. The states were left with no unifying leadership. The pandemic programs had no unifying leadership because the Global Health Security and Biodefense Unit was dismantled in 2018. And the pandemic playbook left by Obama was left to gather dust. Now, the US, in spite of being one of the world's most advanced economies, is the epicenter of COVID-19, currently experiencing close to 2,000 deaths a day. Ignoring the science and the obvious risk, the president wants to start lifting lockdown restrictions already. The good news-only culture of the White House mirrors the Chinese Communist Party. The leadership of both countries suppress information they don't agree with, ultimately culminating in lost time that all but signed the death warrants of hundreds of thousands of people. The three governments of the US, China, and the MARC have all played politics with pandemics and paid the price. Unfortunately, in the real world, that price spills over to the rest of the world as well.